So now that we've covered two different ways to make brushes, so we've covered creating an alpha brush where we actually have an alpha that's embedded into the brush, and we've talked about creating an insert mesh brush, which allows you to take geo and embed that into a brush. Let's talk about one more type of brush, and that is creating a depth masking brush. So to start off here, I just have my model here loaded into ZBrush. I've gone through with some of the alphas that we've created in the previous videos to kind of describe a little more of the shape and form across the surface. I've also gone in and started cleaning up the various areas by adding some lines around the edges to give panel kind of functionality, and also a lot of cleanup with some H polish and some other brushes to kind of refine some of the forms out a little bit better and make things a little cleaner overall. So just going through and just working kind of front to back on my model and just cleaning up all the different areas. So before going into the depth masking, I just want to make a little demo object inside of ZBrush here to actually explain this a little bit better. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my tool palette over here and just pick the cylinder 3D object. And I'm just going to take this and then just come down to that initialize tab there and just do H divide all the way up and V divide all the way up. So 256 H divide and 128 V divide. And then I'm just going to make that a polymesh 3D object. Next, I'm just going to click on that object there and I'm going to locate the Q 3D object and load that guy in. I'm just going to come and turn him right into a polymesh 3D off the start, and then I'm going to go to my brush menu and locate the trim brush. So hitting B on my keyboard, isolating by the letter T, and then finding the trim curve brush. Just going to tell me it's going to be my active brush. It's okay. And now I'm going to hold Control Shift to activate trim curve, and I'm going to come here and just trim part of this model off. So I actually want to trim the bottom part. Once again, you can hold space bar to move that around, and then just trim that section off. So I end up with something like this. Now with this tool selected, I'm coming to the subtool palette here and just append in that cylinder object that we divided up. So you get something like that. Now I'm going to take this cylinder object and just make sure it's the selected subtool. I'm going to come up to the scale transpose line and just click and hold shift to draw a transpose line out, and then grabbing the end inner circle, just scale that shape down some. And after you do it once, you can just hit 1 on your keyboard and it will repeat that scale. So just get it a little bit smaller like that. And then I'm going to go to the move transpose line and just kind of move that into position, so something like this. Just trying to make a little plane here that has one cylinder that's like this and then another cylinder that's subtracted. So using this transpose line, I can now go to this middle circle from the kind of top view here, hold Control and click and drag, and that's going to clone that object off. And so now I have a duplicate version. So I'm going to rotate up and then draw another transpose line out holding Shift on that second cylinder, then hold Shift in the inner circle and just embed this other cylinder into that box a little bit more, so something like that. Then I'm going to go back to draw, and I'm going to come over to my subtool palette over here and just click the main box object, and then come down to merge here and just do merge down. Hit OK on that, and now they're all grouped together as one tool. Now if I come over here and look, you're going to see that I still have one of those cylinders still masked from when I did that actual duplication, so I'm going to hold Control and clear that mask. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to give a new polygroup to each of the elements. Right now the polygrouping is kind of all over the place, so this group here was done through the actual trim, and then the two cylinders have the same grouping on both of them. So I'm going to come down here to the actual polygroup tab here and then just click on auto groups, and that's going to give each element their own polygroup. Then I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just isolate one of these cylinders here, the one I actually want to do subtract on. And I'm going to come over here in the polygroup tab again and do group as Dynamesh sub. And that's going to give it that white polygroup that we talked about in the actual Dynamesh videos to kind of subtract that object from the other two elements. Then I'm going to hold Control and Shift one more time and just click on this guy here, which is going to invert my selection and make the others visible. And then I'm just going to come over here and do a group visible on those guys. So these two guys have one polygroup, and then if I Control Shift and click back, and that other cylinder has that white polygroup. So now this mesh is set up to do a Dynamesh subtract process and a Dynamesh union process. So I'm going to go back to the geometry tab here. I'm going to locate Dynamesh right here and change my resolution to say 512, turn my blur to 0, turn project off, and turn group on, and then just click Dynamesh. After the Dynamesh process is done, you're going to notice that I'm going to get a shape like this. So I have a cylinder that's actually sticking out, and then I have another cylinder that's actually embedded in. So this is going to be our little shape we're actually going to demo this kind of depth functionality on. So the next thing I want to do is I just want to fill this entire object with a white color. So I'm going to come in my subtool menu and make sure I have it selected, make sure white is my primary color, and then come up to color here and do color fill object. And as you'll notice that object is now filled with that white color, and if you come to your subtool palette over here, you'll see this paintbrush icon is active. So that means the colorize information is now turned on with this model. So now I come over and now just select a red color over here and make sure my Z add and Z subtract is turned off. And now, like normal, I could just come through and start painting on my model. Now, as you start painting on your model inside of ZBrush, you can pretty much paint wherever you want. So wherever you actually apply a stroke, it's going to just allow you to sculpt or paint along the surface. Now, one thing that you will notice is that when I'm actually doing this, that ZBrush isn't really constraining to any of the edges or any of the harsh surfaces along this actual shape here. It's just allowing me to literally paint wherever I want to paint. Well, what if I want to hold one of these edges, or say I only want to paint up to a certain edge, or I only want to paint here and not have it affect that kind of upper wall or that angle in which the topology of the surface changes. So I want to keep these borders kind of constrained or held as I'm actually sculpting or painting on my model. Well, this functionality can all be done inside the brush menu using a depth mask. So first I'm going to come over here and just click this little divider line here to open up another area to dock palettes. Then I'm going to go up to the brush menu here and I'm just going to grab this little shape here and just drag it over. Now with the actual brush palette docked over here, I'm going to come down to the actual depth tab here, and in here this is how you can control the depth masking for a brush. So there's a little button here that you can actually activate called depth mask. So come over there and click that. So now we have depth masking turned on. Now with this depth masking turned on, just with the default settings, you're not going to notice too much different. I'm still going to be able to come in with this kind of red color and just paint across all those borders. Well, let's come over here and first grab a blue color on our model and just kind of reframe it here. And then I'll come over here and I'm going to adjust this inner depth to be, say, -0.01. So just scrolling this over. And what this is going to do, it's going to allow me to mask convex areas on the model. So now if I say start up at the top here and just start painting, you'll notice that when I get close to the edge is actually locking, or it's not allowing the paint to actually go past it. So you can see it's holding that convex edge border. So this will work with this setting over here for our depth graph for any areas that have a convex shape. So any part of my model here that is convex, it's not going to allow me to go past that edge. So this is going to allow you to come through and kind of color break up certain areas on your model. So you can see it's going to stop right when you get to that certain edge. Well, this setting right here with the actual depth graph looking like this, with the outer depth set to 1 and the inner depth set to -0.01, is only going to work on those convex surfaces. So if I come to this area here with this kind of concave surface where the actual surface is going in, and just come over here and paint with this brush, you're going to notice that it's just going to bleed over like it was doing normally. So how do we go by making a concave version of this brush that will work on those concave faces? So I'm going to come over here to the depth slider again. I'm going to change my outer depth this time to that 0.01. So just finding that and changing my inner depth to 1. So basically reversing what we had a second ago. Now I come over here, I'm just going to change to a yellow paint. And now if I come in and start painting on my model here, and I come to an area where there's a concave surface, you're going to see it's going to hold that border there. So this is going to allow me to come in and kind of fill or paint or sculpt on certain areas like that, and it's not going to bleed into those concave surfaces. Now this brush, once again, will not work with the actual convex surfaces, so if I come here and start painting, you're going to notice it's going to bleed right over that lip. So that's the basic principles behind the actual depth masking. Now the more or less you change the other area over here is going to determine how much bleed is going to happen. So if I come up here and just kind of adjust that slider there and then come down here and paint again, you're going to see that I'm going to get more of that kind of fall off across that actual concave connection there. So just trying to get this as low as possible. It's usually better to keep it above 0. You don't want to take this actual depth down to 0, so keeping it something very small, like a 0.01 in the negative or the positive, depending on which depth you're in, is kind of the best way to do it as you hold those edges while you're actually sculpting. Now this knowledge can be applied to any brush. So if you come over here and set a depth mask for any of your brushes, you can just go up to the brush save as and save that out, and then every time you use that brush it's going to have this depth masking turned on. Now it's not only limited to, say, sculpting brushes and painting brushes. It can also be used with masking. So let's quickly set up 2 masking brushes that are going to allow us to create a masking brush for the convex surfaces and a masking brush for the concave surfaces. So masking brushes inside of ZBrush are accessed by holding the Control key on your keyboard. So as you'll notice, as soon as I hold Control on my actual keyboard here, you're going to see that the depth options are all going to change, and I now have that masking brush selected. So if I release Control, I'm back to standard, and if I hold Control, I'm back to a mask brush. So what this means is that in order to change any of the values for the mask brush, I need to make sure I have Control pressed. Because if I don't have Control pressed and I go in here and change any of these depth settings in here, it's just going to change it for a standard brush. So holding Control, make sure you have that mask pen selected. Then I'm going to come over here and turn on depth masking. And now we're just going to set up a brush for the convex surfaces. So I want to make sure my outer depth is set to 1, and then I want to set my inner depth to negative 0.01. So just clicking and dragging until you get to that negative 0.01, so something like that. Now with this selected, we can now go test this out. So still holding Control, we're going to find one of those convex surfaces and just hold Control and start masking, and you're going to see it's going to mask right to that edge. So that's the exact kind of functionality we want. And this is going to work on any of those actual convex surfaces. So you can come through and just start masking all over on your model. So I'm just going to clear my mask there. So now that we're happy with this brush, we can just save it. So just make sure you're holding Control and then go up to the brush menu here and go to Save As. We can save it anywhere on our computer and we can just load it back in with that brush menu, or we can save it to a certain directory. So if I come through here and save it to the program files, Pixologic Zbrush 4R6/Z-Startup/Brush Presets folder, this masking brush will load every single time I start ZBrush. So similar way we kind of saved that alpha brush in the actual first brush creation video. So I'm just going to come and label this mask convex, and then just hit enter. So now if I hold Control, you can see that I now have a mask convex brush. So now I just need to create a mask concave brush. So I'm going to come back over here to our depth slider again. I'm going to change the outer depth while holding Control to 0.01. Make sure I get that setting there, and then change that inner depth to 1. And after that's set, making sure I still have Control set and these values typed in, come up to Save As again, and now I'm going to save a mask concave brush. And just hit enter. So now I have 2 versions of this brush. So I have the concave and the convex, and you can just hold Control and start masking with either of them, and you're going to notice it's going to hold those edges really nicely. So now let's use these brushes on our actual model in more of a practical manner. So I'm going to come over here and actually load my helmet model back in, like so, and I'm going to just change my color back to white so it comes in looking more normal. And now I'm just going to find an area on my model, so like this guy here, and just hold Alt and select that part, and then just zoom in a little. So now if I hold Control, I just have my mask convex brush loaded. I'm going to come up here and change my draw size a little bit. And now I can go to this part of my model and say I just want to mask one of these panels out. So I just want to mask all the area below this line and allow me to kind of sculpt on that upper area. Well, with this brush now, I can hold Control and hit right on that edge there, and you're going to see it's going to hold that really, really nicely. So with these brushes now, you can come in and even refine your shapes even more. So just coming in with these kind of masking attributes and hold all those edges. and now I have a really clean masking line that would take me a long time to kind of do manually, but with this actual depth masking, I've just masked it in less than a second. So extremely powerful usage of this depth masking. So now that you have these kind of two masking brushes created, you can come through and start masking any areas on your model and get really precise and clean results. Now there will be occasions where it will kind of go over the edges in some places depending on how harsh your actual edges are on your models, but if you have really tight clean lines, it's going to hold those edges every single time. Well, I hope that helps some on the masking in there, and we'll continue using these masks and some of the other brushes we have generated to continue sculpting a helmet inside of ZBrush.